Here with your daily neuro nugget. So I'm alive. Thank you guys for all the well wishes. I still don't know what it is, bug or something, but it doesn't matter, right? I have a lot to cover today, guys. Lab manager comes forward and talks about a source of DNA that is potentially females. It says female in the documents, right? And this is going to be, I guess, an atypical sort of live. We know that it's like dark in here. It's late. I have a migraine, but I still wanted to talk about this. And I'm like, you know what? It's Friday night, and all of you guys have been so kind, so concerned about my well-being. Are you okay, babe? Oh my God. You're okay. So this is, look, you guys are literally, this is so ghetto. You're on a stack of books. It's literally what you're, whoa. You're on a stack of books, so I probably shouldn't lean on this because you're going to fall and bust your ass again. I'm like surrounded by books. I've been reading all day. Guys, welcome. We're going to be talking about this lab manager. I'm going to be covering part of that redacted hearing. I did 2 lives already on that redacted hearing, but this is a 175-page document. And when you have a lab manager being interviewed by Ann Taylor, being questioned by Ann Taylor, and they are talking about female DNA, well, we kind of have to talk about this, right? So yeah, I'm feeling much better, guys. Thank you. I've just been hanging out, eating all the food. For some reason, like, I actually tracked my calories for today. My appetite was crazy. Sometimes when I get sick, it's hit or miss. Calories, or my appetite increases drastically, or it just completely drops. I ate like 3,500 calories today, so I'm hungry. And I actually finished this entire book today. This is a very old book, but it's very good. And I'm almost done with this book. I'm like a speed reader. This is what I have left. Like the end of the book. It's like one last chapter. So if you guys want to read something interesting, this is a very good book. It is fiction, while this one is a sciencey book. I recommend everybody read, especially if you are into true crime. Anyway, let's get into this redacted hearing. Let's talk about SNPs. Like I said, if you guys are just coming in, bear with me. I'm still not feeling 100%. So if I'm slurring my speech or if my nose is runny, please forgive me. That being said, we're going to get right into it because there's a lot to cover, a lot of pages. Probably, I'm going to try to cover 30 plus pages in this live. So here we go, guys. Here we go. And then when I'm done, I'll try to catch up in the chat, okay? So this is the direct examination of Riley Nowlin. Before we get started, guys, I actually Googled this bitch. I Googled this bitch, right? I want to know who she is. I want to know what she's all about. And I found a link I will share with you guys, which is actually a CV, right? It's a resume of her, and it's on the isp.idaho.gov website. And I mean, this lady seems to know quite a bit. She seems to be very highly educated. So before we break down this hearing, I just want you guys to know, okay, she's highly educated. She knows what she's doing on that stand. So she needs to be very careful how she's answering these questions by Ann Taylor, right? And Ann Taylor knows that she has to basically play games with these people because otherwise she's not going to get the answers that she wants. We've seen her question Maury, we've seen her question Payne, and they just are BSing, right? They're saying they don't remember, they don't know. So let's see how Riley Nowlin, this laboratory manager for ISP, Idaho State Police Forensic Services, is going to answer these questions. Now, in this resume, it says that she was educated back in 1996 at the College of Idaho. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Biology and History. So she has a BS in Biology and History. Okay, cool. Experience, it says that she worked with ISP Forensic Services Laboratory Lab Manager from 2014 to present. Before that, she worked with ISP Forensic Services as a forensic scientist, working with biology and DNA. And back in 2002, 2003, she was a forensic scientist 1. So she's worked with Idaho State Police since the beginning, right? Since 2003 to now, working her way up the chain. Forensic scientist one, forensic scientist two. Now she's managing the lab, right? She also has several certifications. One is from the American Board of Criminalistics Molecular Biology, and she also is part of several professional organizations. One is the American Society of Crime Lab Directors, the American Society of Crime Lab Directors and Lab Accredited Board Assessor, also part of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, and the Northwest Association of Forensic Scientists. So, I mean, it sounds like she knows her stuff. It says that she's an equal opportunity employer, and it shows that she's given her testimony in several state courts, including Ada County, Bangor County, Bingham County, Blaine, Bonner, Boundary Canyon, Fremont, Jefferson, Jerome, Latah, Kootenai, Nez Perce, Payette, and Twin Falls. And she also has kept up with her C's, which is imperative, right? Because you can have a degree, but if you're not keeping up with these CEs, these continuing education credits, then you're kind of useless in your profession, especially in the field of biology, especially in the field of anything to do with science, because science progresses very quickly. So this is essential to know. Again, why? Because when she is going to be questioned by Ann Taylor, she can't bullshit her way out of this one, right? This woman has gotten her CEs in 2023. She had what we're going to be talking about, guys, her professional credits for STRs. We've heard STRs and SNPs and nucleotides and polymorphisms, all these scientific terms. We're going to be talking about that today, right? So she has training in STRs. Anyway, enough on her resume because it's quite lengthy. I'm pulling up this hearing. We're going to start, right? Miss Taylor is saying good morning. She says, good morning. Will you please state your name for the record? Rylene, R-Y-L-E-N-E, Nowlin, N-O-W-L-I-N. I think you've done this before, says Ann Taylor, a few times. How are you employed? I'm employed as a forensic laboratory manager with the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Laboratory in Meriden, Idaho. How long have you worked for Idaho State Forensics Lab? I've worked for the Idaho State Police Forensic Services since November 2002. Did you have prior experience similar? Prior to my employment with ISP, I did not. She did not. So what did she do from 96 to 2003? I'm just curious. How were you trained for your job? I have formal education. I was originally hired as a forensic scientist in the biology DNA unit. I was required to have a degree in biology. I was required to have courses in work genetics, molecular biology, biochem, and statistics, and then I completed the ISP Services training program in biology screening, as well as in DNA analysis, as well as in DNA database analysis. And we've heard about databases. Oh, have we heard about databases? And then I've completed hundreds of hours of CEs over my years. So again, she's highly trained, highly educated, so she better answer accurately, right? Are you a member of any professional organizations? Yes, ma'am. Which ones? I'm a member of the Northwest Association of Forensic Scientists, American Association of Forensic Sciences, and the American Society of Crime Lab Directors. Are you part of a collaborative? Yes, I'm a member. So blah, 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 right? This is page 39. If you guys are choosing to follow along on this idaho.gov document, you can. Page 39 is going over her resume, which we already went over. Page 40 is doing the same thing, right? I'm just going to skip through her resume. I already covered that. Now, Ann Taylor starts talking about standards and protocols. And she says, I want to start with the first part of it. You mentioned, I think, that there's standards and protocols. My definition of them that helps assure your work so that somebody could look and see what you did and maybe get the same result or understand what you did. Do I understand that right? And again, that's important because we've been told time and time again that they know that Brian Koberger is guilty, but they've never been able to actually go back and show their work for a variety of reasons because it doesn't exist. We don't have that anymore. We don't know what happened to that. We don't know. It doesn't exist. If you're gonna pin a quadruple homicide on a man that is innocent until proven guilty, you need to show your work, right? That's like going to math class and getting your fat ass to class and having your homework done. And then the math teacher's like, okay, show me your work. Show me how you did a problem. And you're just, looking like a fucking idiot because you don't know how you got, you don't know how the fuck you got the numbers because you fucking cheated because you paid your classmate with a bag of Cheetos so that he would do your little homework for you, right? That's what you did, and now you don't know how the fuck you got the answer, and you don't know how to do it because you don't know. Yes, it's the methods we follow, and yes, that will be one application someone could look and see what we did. Now, you mentioned at the very end of what you told me before, DNA has something separate, correct? And Taylor says, what do you mean? Or she says, what do you mean? Well, because our laboratory is the participant in the National DNA Index System. It's commonly referred to as CODIS, which stands for Combined DNA Index System. We are subject to additional standards set forth by the FBI because they manage the database. And Taylor asks, what are those standards? Well, those standards are known as the QA standards. They cover everything from when I listed the classes I had at the beginning. They decide what classes a DNA analyst coming in should have, what education a DNA technical leader should have, what things need to be included in a validation study, how facilities need to be controlled. It covers all the testing. So basically, she's telling us that the FBI controls everything, okay? Just because she works for ISP doesn't mean that she's in charge. At the end of the day, it sounds like whoever is running the background, the people in power are the FBI. They control the standards. They set everything in place. And this is so important because a lot of people, when they think about ISP, Idaho State Police, they're thinking, okay, this is a separate entity. This has nothing to do with the FBI. But we are actually being told quite the opposite, that all these validation studies, everything, all the standards, everything is basically set forth by the FBI, right? So then Anne goes on to ask her questions about, the validation studies and what they do and what it has to do with CODIS. And she says, well, our DNA section has to do that because we use CODIS. The rest of the lab, because of part of our accreditation standards. And Ann Taylor then says, tell me what CODIS is briefly. Pay attention, because a lot of people still don't know what CODIS is. She says, CODIS is Combined DNA Index System. It's essentially a national DNA database. It exists on 3 levels. There's a local level, your county sheriff's office, local police departments. There's a state level, which is typically the state lab. It is limited to public laboratories, and then the national level. In Idaho, the Idaho State Police Forensic Services Lab in Meriden is the only DNA lab in the state. So there are no local labs in the state of Idaho, and the database contains different indices. There's a forensics index, there's profiles obtained from items of evidence, there's an offender index. Those are samples from convicted qualifying offenses in your state as determined by your state legislature. If your state legislature allows arrestees, there's an arrestee index. So this is why you have to be careful who you vote for, because all these people making these laws, okay, this matters what they have access to. There's also a missing person index and 4 remains. She says, and Taylor says, do you have any special role with the CODIS database? She says, currently I'm a CODIS user. That's my only role in the moment. What was your role in the fall of November of 2022? I was a CODIS user. Do you have any administrative responsibilities with CODIS? Not currently. Have you in the past? In the past, I have served as an alternate state administrator for Idaho. And Taylor says, for CODIS, DNA that goes into CODIS, what kind of profile is used? She says, if I'm understanding the question correctly, there's different types of DNA profiles, and what goes into CODIS is known as STR profile, or short tandem repeat. And says, what kind of information is in a short tandem repeat, or an STR? She says, can I give a brief explanation about DNA? Sure. So DNA is a substance that's found in the cells of our body. It acts as a blueprint. It tells our bodies what form to take and how to function. Between individuals, it is over 99% the same. Okay, did you catch that? 99% the same between all of us. Between you, between me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for female, male, whatever we identify as, 99% the same. That is why we all have the same basic structure, and our bodies function in basically the same way. In forensics and in STRs, we are targeting that less than 1% that is unique to an individual, with the exception of identical twins. And so areas of DNA that vary widely between individuals do not code for anything typically, so it doesn't tell us anything about a person. What? So she's saying that We're all the same, baby. We're all the same. We're all 99% the same. Doesn't matter the color, shape, size. But that 1% that makes us different is what they're looking at when they're looking at these STRs. With the exception of identical twins, right? When I look at an STR profile, I can tell you if that person is genetically male or genetically female, and that is all. So STR profiles can only tell us man versus woman. Okay? Pay attention. Pay attention. Keep paying attention. We're only on page 45. We have like 20 plus pages to go. It's going to get hot, guys. You might want to grab a drink. I know I said I would probably grab something stronger, but I'm sick. But I have a drink for me. Have a drink for me. If you're over 21, have a drink for me. And Taylor says, do you know what an SNP profile is? And we've heard STR and we have heard SNPs, right? I do. What is it? An SNP profile is a single nucleotide polymorphism. So you're looking at a single nucleotide, whereas the STR is a series of repeating nucleotides, a specific repeat that we're looking for. And Taylor says, the SNP then, is that a closer look at a person's genome? She says, I would like to state that I'm not an expert in SNPs. I'm not qualified in the SNP technology and have not been qualified in the SNP technology. With STRs, depending on the chemistry, you're looking at, hold on. You're looking at anywhere from 13 to 25 plus locations. With SNPs, my understanding is in general that you're looking at a minimum of 10,000. And Taylor says, does that mean there's more information about a human contained in an SNP than there is an STR profile? And then, of course, Mr. Nye butts in, because that was a very important question. She's saying, which one is more important, the SNP or the STR? Because it's sure starting to sound like the SNP matters a lot more, right? And then Mr. Nye says, Your Honor, I'm going to object at this point. This witness is not disclosed as an expert, and she just testifies she's not an expert in SNP technology. Hitler says, I appreciate that with respect to her answer, and I will take that into account in the event the defense intends to rely on that testimony. I took it as a sort of background about her general knowledge. I'll allow it for now. I'm not taking it as expert testimony about that SNP, beyond that basic understanding of what SNP is. Miss Taylor, thank you. Do you remember my question? She says, yes, I would assume if you're looking at a larger part of the human genome that you would be getting a larger amount of information about someone. So this bitch, I say it in a loving manner. Okay, this hoe literally just said that the SNP is much more important than what? Than an STR, right? Now, just a quick Google search, right? How many SNPs in human DNA? How many do you think that is? According to two sources, one comes from nogenetics.org and the other one comes from learn.genetics.utah.edu. 10 million SNPs. That's a lot of SNPs in the human genome, okay? 10 million SNPs. So SNPs give us much more information about a person than an STR. Remember that as we're going forward. Again, we're going to be talking about this female DNA that was found. Just curious. I have one more question about CODIS, and then I want to move in a different area, says Ann Taylor. You mentioned there's 4 indexes, and you talked about a forensic index. Correct. What is that one used for? The forensic index is where profiles generated from items of evidence can be uploaded. These are rules about what can be uploaded, though. It cannot match someone known to be the victim of a crime. It cannot match someone whose DNA should be in a place outside of a crime being committed. It cannot be taken directly from a suspect of a crime where you would reasonably assume their DNA would be present. It must be related to a crime, and it must be believed to be from the putative perpetrator of that crime. So she is telling us that in this database, okay, according to the state of Idaho, you can't just upload random shit, right? Like you can't just upload random shit. You have to know or have a very good idea that it's coming from somebody that was directly involved in a crime. You can't take anything directly from a suspect of a crime. So I'm going to assume that that means that you can't take things from the trash, potentially back in PA, the trash pool that we're also going to be talking about, and upload in this forensic index, right? Because that goes against Idaho legislature. So Ann Taylor says, so if I understand it, you use DNA, you get an STR, and only under certain circumstances can you use CODIS. Do I understand that right? Correct. Okay, outside of CODIS, if you create a profile, a DNA profile of somebody, is that a separate thing you do in your lab, even if you're not going to run them through CODIS? Yes, when we receive items of evidence of samples from known individuals, we generate a DNA profile from those. Did you become involved in the homicide in Moscow from 2022? She says, involved as the manager of the laboratory Meriden. I haven't actually done any work on the evidence in the case or issued any reports. All right. Is it fair to say you did not go to the residence then? Correct. As a lab manager, do you understand about what evidence has come into the lab from that case? She says, there was a lot of evidence submitted. I have a general knowledge of items that have come in, but I could not provide you with a detailed list off the top of my head. That's okay. I will not ask you to. Thank you. As a lab manager, are you aware of different bits of testing that were done related to this case? In general, yes. Are you aware of a profile called Unknown Male A? Yes. Let me just tell you something, okay? She's a lab manager. Again, somebody who has worked myself over 2 decades, I'm going on 3 decades in labs, laboratories, research, all kinds of laboratories. Most lab managers don't know shit. They're not that involved in the day-to-day activities. They're not that involved in the day-to-day processing of specimens, even in the world of forensics, because they're too busy managing the fucking lab, right? So they're doing admin things. This tells me personally a lot about this woman, right? She's very involved. She has some idea of what's going on in her lab. That's a good thing, but maybe not. We'll get to that later. What's concerning to me as I'm seeing this, I'm like, damn, she's a lab manager, okay? She doesn't have to be involved, but even she is aware of the specimens that are going on in her laboratory. She's aware of these sources of unknown male A, several other unknown male B, C, D, E sources. She kind of has a rough idea. Versus Payne and Mowry, right? We know that Detective Payne was actually in charge of this investigation. But when he was asked, what's the answer that we got from Payne? It was nothing but a disappointment, because he was like, well, I don't really remember, right? One of the largest cases in the US of A in the last, what are we going on now, like 20 years? It feels longer, right? Does this case not feel longer to you guys? Because it doesn't feel like 2.5 years. It feels like we've been at this shit for like a decade at least. Maybe that's just me because of the whole Delphi case. You guys know, some of you know that I used to actually live in Delphi. So it's like shit case after shit case. Shit show after shit show, right? So just wanted to point that out, that this lab manager has more of an idea, a better idea of these specimen samples, these unknown males, than the fucking lead detective. I don't know about you, but I would be, I'm not telling you to do it, by the way. I would personally be complaining about Detective Payne. And if I was a family member, oh my God, if I knew that Detective Payne answered in the way that he did, that he's completely fucking clueless or pretending to be, I'd be filing a complaint. That's all I'm going to say about that. So Ann Taylor goes on to ask her, Where did that come from? Referring to the unknown male DNA. She says, to my recollection, unknown male A came from a swab taken from a knife sheath that was submitted by Moscow Police Department, which is like one of the most corrupt police departments ever to have existed. Children of the Corn type shit police department, in my opinion. Ann Taylor says, are you aware of unknown male B? I believe there was another sample from hearing the previous testimony that was from in the house. I would only want you to testify from your own base of knowledge. From my own memory, I don't recall exactly where B was from. Fair enough. Thank you for clarifying that for me. Are you aware that investigative genetic genealogy or forensic investigative genetic genealogy was used in this case? Yes. What was your role in that? My role specific to this case was facilitating the signing of a memorandum of understanding, making sure all parties received it and had signed it. Those parties being the police agency, the prosecuting attorney's office, as well as a member of ISP's management team. And then when the preliminary report was received, my job was to look over it and to ensure that it had all the required pieces in the report, and then to authorize payment of the invoice for the testing. So she was busy. What role did you have with the laboratory that was going to perform the FIGG work? As far as how we come to be in contact with them? So when ISP decided to pursue a contract with a laboratory that could perform the SMP testing that we talked about earlier, we're a state agency, so we don't just get to call up anybody and hire them. So we had to go through a bidding process. So part of my role was developing the scope of work for that invitation to bid, as in what we expected the vendor to perform. And then when the bids came in, I was involved in the team that evaluated the documents that were submitted. And then ultimately, the division of purchasing determined who won the bid. That is a fuck ton of work just to try to get to the bottom of who killed 4 kids. That's a lot of work. Like, you can't, people don't realize that what all the shit, the legal, all the politics that go on behind the scenes, right? It's not like you can just take a specimen here and send it to a lab, right? You have to go through all of this bidding, all this political bullshit. Personally, for me, I'm not a fan of that. Like, can't we just send it to a private lab, please? Without all this bullshit, right? Seems like a waste of time and money. But that's just me. And Taylor says, did Idaho State Police Forensics have a contract with this laboratory Othram? They were the winning bid through that process, so they were under contract with the Department of Purchasing, correct? Is the contract with the Department of Purchasing's day-to-day operations or how they operate? Hold on. Sorry, my crap top. My crap top. Did Idaho State Police Forensics have a contract with this laboratory Othram? Yes, they were the winning bid, blah, 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 blah. She says, is the contract with the Department of Purchasing that you perform these services and we pay you for them, essentially? Or does it have to have more meat to it to talk about some of the things that you were talking about? I'm really not familiar with the Department of Purchasing's day-to-day operations or how they operate. My role was developing the scope of work. We expect them to develop the profiles that can be uploaded to the public genealogy databases. We expect them to provide us a written report. We expect the report to contain certain things, to have a header, to have a date, to list the case number, have page numbers, those kinds of things. Outside that description of the scope of work and the requirements, did your lab have a separate contract with Othram that basically said you agreed to do these things? We had that. They won the bid from Division of Purchasing, and that's a state contract for performing your work. You mentioned a memorandum of understanding you helped facilitate to be signed by the parties. Was Othram one of the parties that signed that? No, this is a memorandum between the law enforcement agencies, the prosecuting attorney's office, and the laboratory. In that memorandum of understanding, that indicated that the interim Department of Justice interim policy applied. Is that right? I believe it did. I don't have the exact text memorized. If I showed you a copy of that memorandum of understanding, would that help you remember if that was part of it? Yes. Your Honor, if I just have a moment to gather that, it's not being offered as an exhibit. Hippler says, just refreshing. And Taylor, it's to aid in her memory. So Anne shows her the paperwork and she says, does looking at that refresh your memory as to whether the Department of Justice interim policy applied? It does say it in the first paragraph that it did apply. Interesting. What is Anne getting to? I think somebody's breaking some fucking rules here. Ann Taylor says, and Your Honor, I'm going to refer to Defense Exhibit D19 here and ask the witness be shown that, and then I'll provide the court my copy. The court, when was this filed? Ms. Taylor says, that would have been filed with the amended Frank's memorandum on the bottom of that page. I'm sorry. And Hippler says, I've got thousands of filings. I have to go by date to find things. And Taylor says, I think it was November 18th or the 20th. At the bottom of the page, you can see some numbers in red, and those were numbered to make it easier to find. The judge says, I just need to find it in the computer first. All right, I found it in my printed documents. And Taylor says, is that the Department of Justice interim policy? Yes, the Department of Justice policy of forensic genealogical DNA analysis and searching. And Taylor says, and in section 7, I believe it's section 7 or page 7, investigative caution. That section? Oh shit, investigative caution. And Taylor, let me ask you a question. Are you familiar with the provision in that policy that says if there's a prosecution case, if somebody's arrested, Brian Koberger, and there's a prosecution case, all items in the forensic IgG should be preserved for court purposes? Okay, did you guys catch that? She's asking, she's going over this policy, right? That ISP is supposed to follow. In this policy, it states that all forensic IgG work needs to be preserved, fucking not deleted, fucking show your work of fucking Payne and Mowry for court purposes. Because now we are in court and they're saying, oh, we don't really have it because we're dumb. She says, I believe that is part. I don't think it's in section 7. It might be, but I believe that's part of preserving. Anne says, okay, what I want to know is, what did Othram preserve? I don't know. I don't know. What did you get back? Says Ann Taylor. We received a preliminary report. In other cases, we'll sometimes get back the DNA extract that was sent to them. I don't recall if we got that back in this case. Anything our laboratory receives, we return to the submitting agency. Taylor says, would validation be part of that validation studies? I would not assume so. I wouldn't assume that would be part of this, no. Would bench notes be important? She says, bench notes, lab bench notes. For our laboratory, we designate those as part of our case record. I'm not familiar with what Othram designates as part of their case record. Miss Taylor says, so I guess that means you don't have any of those? Again, asking what is happening to all of these IgG documentation that she has been asking for the last 2.5 years. And she says, no, we don't have those. We only have the preliminary report. And Taylor says, all right, I'll move to a different area of questioning, and it's about the requirements with Othram. You mentioned their goal was to create profiles and create a report, but to search public databases. Correct. There are public genealogy databases that will allow entry of law enforcement samples, and that is part of the scope of work. They were required to enter in those databases. And Taylor, and are you aware there are databases that do not allow law enforcement to search? Yes. And Taylor says, were you part of work after Othram began their work to try and do an investigation? I was not, as far as, I guess I'm unclear. We did receive evidence submitted to the laboratory before, during, and after for all sections. Is that what you're referring to? Let me rephrase my question. I think that question was too broad, says Ann Taylor. While Othram was doing their work, were you part of any work to help Othram? For instance, did you get any documents that you did some research on to try to help Othram? No. Were you aware that Othram was just stopped from doing any further work at some point? I was aware of that. And was this before they produced any results? No, we received a preliminary report. I recall receiving that because that's how I know I can approve payment of the invoice. So I know we received that prior to them being told they were stopped. Were you part of the decision to stop them? I was not. How did you find out about it? I found out about it in an email from my lab system director. Do you remember what then happened? I don't recall. Does the forensics lab continue to contract with Othram? Yes. If Othram had a file that would have had any validation studies and bench notes, anything they did on the case, would you have received that? Again, validation studies would be odd to associate with individual cases, so I wouldn't assume they would do that. Again, I'm not familiar with their procedures, and as far as who would receive documents, usually it would be, I would assume, the agency, which we received their preliminary report. You mentioned that you're not familiar with their procedures. Not in detail, no. What procedures are you familiar with? For Othram? Yes. As part of the bid process, all the bidders were required to submit. I believe they were required to submit their procedures, and it was essentially just looking over them to say, yes, they have a procedure in place for extracting DNA. Yes, they have a procedure in place for doing SMPs. So yes, they meet the minimums for the invitation to bid. But again, I'm not qualified in that technology, so I wouldn't know. And Taylor says, I would not ask for your opinion on them. I won't ask you to quote them to me, but you saw those? Yes, at the beginning of the bid process. Let's switch gears. In the case we are here today, do you recall there being a trash pull? Okay, now shit's gonna get good, guys, so hang on. I'm sorry, there being a what? A trash pull, says Ann Taylor. I recall receiving evidence from a trash pull, correct. And for those of you who are in here, guys, the trash pull. The trash pull from PA, the trash pull from outside of the home of Koberger's parents. You know, the same home that was fucking destroyed by the FBI when instead they could have just arrested him at any time when he had been seen jogging alone out of town. Yeah, that trash pull. Mrs. Taylor says, what role did you have in deciding anything about that trash pull? Nothing about the trash pull occurring. I do recall there being a brief. I can't remember if it was a phone meeting or a video meeting, and just being asked in general what items from someone's trash are good for DNA. Did you give advice? I don't know if it was me specifically or another member of our unit, but we did offer suggestions on items that are good for DNA. Did you receive items to test? Yes. What instructions were you given about those items? The discussion was a person of interest has been developed and to analyze the items from the trash to determine if they could be inclusive of the DNA profile that was developed from the nav sheath. Unknown male A. What was the date that you received that trash? The trash was received into the laboratory on December 28th of 2022. So you were looking for a male profile? Correct. All right. Did you find a male profile? I did not perform the actual testing, but yes, there were male profiles developed. So they found or developed several male profiles, not just one. How many, says Ann Taylor? I don't know. Funny how she doesn't know, right? Do you know anything about either male profile or any of them? I believe one of the male profiles, designated as E, was determined they could be a biological parent or child of the profile from the nav sheath. And are you aware that Brian Koberger's DNA was in the trash? I was not aware. Did you become aware? I became aware later. We didn't have his name at that time. You didn't know his name on December 28th? No, I did not. Okay. Were you on December 28th, were you aware that not male E, but another male profile had been identified? From the trash. The trash pull? I knew there were some mixtures of DNA that were also included. Ann Taylor says, what of the mixtures? Did it have a male DNA profile? I believe it did. Ann Taylor, and wasn't that profile the major component of that profile with a minor female, okay? That is a big boom. A minor female for me, right? I think the major component of the trash pull from PA, the trash pull right outside the home of Kohlberger's parents, most of that profile was composed of female DNA. Is that correct? I believe that sounds correct. And later, didn't that return to Brian Kohlberger? We actually did not perform that comparison. What the fuck is going on? What the fuck is going on? So this bitch, do you guys understand how big this is? Again, reminder for everyone to read every fucking line of all these legal documents, guys. Most of that profile, we know they built several profiles from that trash pool, several DNA profiles. They are saying here that most of the component of that profile was actually a minor female. Do you understand that? And do you also understand that this woman with 1,000 degrees, certifications, forensics, whatever, is also saying that they never performed that comparison, that they never said that this had any ties to Brian Kohlberger, that they did not perform that comparison, meaning they never performed that comparison from the trash pull to the touch DNA that was found in the button, okay? And Taylor, did you and I have a discussion a few days ago? We did. Did you tell me that you knew that to be Brian Kohlberger's DNA? I said I thought that was, and I could not find the report where we had done that comparison. So is this bitch just pulling shit out of her ass? Or was this her having a random conversation with Ann Taylor and just giving her her opinion? Because you can't just go to Ann Taylor as a forensic blah, blah, blah manager from Idaho State Police and say, well, yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think it's Brian Kohlberger, although most of the DNA was actually a minor female. I mean, in my heart, I think it is, but I don't actually have any verification. We actually do not have reports to show that we did the fucking work. We can't find the reports to show that we actually even did that comparison. I'm sick. I've since looked through and we did not make that comparison. So she was saying she could not find the report, right? And then she actually looked and then she found out that they never made that comparison. So I cannot say that he was included in that mixture. Our laboratory did not do that comparison. And Taylor, but a DNA profile was made for that mixture, is that right? Yes. And there's a minor female and a major male. That is my understanding. And Taylor, as you could. And Taylor says, as you could, sorry, my computer, by eye, look at that and tell that's Brian Kohlberger's? Couldn't you if you wanted to? If I wanted to, I could probably look. I did not. Okay, you could still do it today if you wanted to. So Ann Taylor, do you guys realize what she's doing? She's saying, okay, fine. You fucked up. You never actually compared this female profile, female/male profile that you guys built to Brian Kohlberger. Fine. You didn't fucking do it. You fucked up. Fine. You thought you did it. You went back. You looked for reports. Turns out you never actually did it. Fine. But if you really wanted to go back and pin this on Brian, you could technically go back and redo your work, right? You could show us. You could redo the work. You could still do it if you wanted to. She said, well, if there was a request to do the comparison again, we don't do a visual comparison evidence to evidence. Our procedures do not allow us to do that for comparisons. And then she says, And Taylor, I need you to help me understand that a little bit. I'm having that question because I understand there was a known male B found on lab item 30. Do you know what I'm talking about? No. Okay, well, I also understand that there was a cigarette butt taken from somebody in connection with the case investigation. Are you familiar with that? I am familiar with that. And that was compared to the DNA on the knife sheath. Is that right? Yes. And that was found to be excludable. Am I using that word right? It was an exclusion, correct. So why the fuck did they exclude that? What we are just learning is that they compared the profile that was built from a cigarette butt to the knife sheath DNA. But instead of adding it to their profile, instead of putting that to work, they said, yeah, we're going to exclude that. We're going to exclude that. So you compared something that was taken from somebody to an item of evidence. Is that right? Something that was a secondary reference, as in someone identified it, is that they saw that person using that item. They saw that person dispose of that item. That item was collected and used as a reference sample from that person because there was someone who said it was from that person. Do you understand what we are hearing now? We are hearing now that ISP broke the fucking law. They broke the fucking law. Why? Because we have gone through this hearing. If you guys have been in here for the last 46, 50 minutes, however long we've been here, is that one of the rules is that you can't just upload random shit into this database. It has to be something that was directly from the crime scene, basically. And instead, they fucked up, they broke the law, and they decided to upload this cigarette butt. That's why Ann Taylor is getting on this bitch's case, because that uploading of cigarette butt DNA is considered a secondary reference. And she says, well, not really, because somebody actually said that they saw this person use the item, that they saw Brian smoking this cigarette. Still broke the law. And who the fuck said that, by the way? Because in my opinion, if you're going to break the law because somebody told you that they saw something and you can't prove that, you're just testing it because you have somebody's word. Who did it? In my opinion, that is the name of a person that we should also be given. They should also be held accountable because they need to be questioned by Ann Taylor as well, right? Was somebody lying? And even if they were not lying, it doesn't matter. ISP still broke the law. You can't just upload random shit. Again, when we went through this redacted hearing transcript at the very beginning today, guys, what did we learn? That you can't do that. You can't just upload random shit. Well, that item was collected and used as a reference sample from that person because there was somebody who said that it was from that person. So just because somebody said something, you're going to run and fucking do it. Okay. And Taylor says, okay, when you got the trash to go through in the lab, you knew what you were looking for. You knew that you were looking for a male, right? Correct. And you knew that the male and his family members lived in a house that produced that bag of trash. Is that right? That's page 63, by the way, for those of you guys who are following along. She says, yes, but not who produced each individual item of the trash pull. And Taylor says, okay. It was not labeled, this water bottle is from a person of interest, this tissue is from a sibling, this Q-tip is from a parent. We did not have that information. It was just, here's some items from a trash pull. And one of those items you took and developed male E? I did not, but yes, the laboratory did. In general, the lab developed male E. Correct. And then compared male A and male E. There was a paternity statistic calculated because they were both single source profiles, meaning only from one individual. Okay, and there's another male profile. Well, that was part of a mixture to my knowledge, meaning more than one person's DNA present on that item. Again, only one male though, is that right? So when there's a mixture of an item of evidence, I don't know if you want me to explain, but the first step is determining how many contributors to that mixture. Then our laboratory utilizes a software program to help break out the components of that mixture. When one individual is male, it's not always possible to say the gender of the second person. Males have X, Y chromosome, females only have X. So if there's an X and Y present, it could be one male, it could be two males, it could be male and female. Without comparing to known reference samples, I can't say that. I haven't seen the profile to my knowledge. So that third male profile that they developed, we're hearing could be anything. It could be a male, it could be a female. It was a mixed sample, basically. Too many people sucking on the same bottle or whatever item it was. And they don't know what it is. They don't know if it's a male, but they're still calling it male here. Interestingly enough, why? Again, this is reinforcing the narrative, right? Because if they really wanted to, they could have just called that sample a mixed gender sample or just a mixed sample, for God's sakes. Use your words. And Taylor says, okay, did you tell me though on that sample, I'm talking about 95.9.1, that was male and a female? I believe that. I don't know if it was designated as in the lab report. To my knowledge, it was. I can't remember what the report said. Again, I did not generate the report and I did not do the work. So I'm not familiar with it as if it was my own work. Okay, male B was also a mixture, was it not? I don't know. Interesting, because if male B was also a mixture, I want to know how many of the samples are mixtures. And they don't know what is fucking what. That's what this is starting to sound like. They don't know what is fucking what, but they're calling everything, it's a male profile. Male profile. Because they can't tell it apart because it was men and potentially female or male and female DNA mix. So they can't not tell it apart. I don't know. Okay. If it was designated as unknown male B, again, I do not know if it was from a mixed sample or not. And Taylor says, Your Honor, if I may just have a moment. Thank you for that. Just a couple other questions for you. As it relates to male E, it was compared to the sheath. Is that right? Correct. A paternity comparison. So male E profile was compared to a lot of other evidence items in the case. Was it not? Correct. And you are allowed to do a manual interpretation per your policy, right? If there is, so it's not black and white. It's not black and white. I don't know about that because, again, I haven't worked in a forensic lab, but in all of the labs I have worked for almost 25 years, everything is black and white. Okay, there's a fucking SOP for everything. Standard operating procedure. There is a manual for everything. Everything you have to follow to a fucking T. You have to be anal. You have to be OCD to be able to work in a lab. And she's saying, well, it's not black and white. So if it's a single source and we can look at it and say that the person is excluded, then they're not the source of the DNA. Then yes, that can be done manual. And by manual, I mean a person looking at it. If it's another comparison, and how we define that comparison is if it's saying something about who could be the source of the DNA on an item of evidence that's relevant to the case, then we do not do a manual comparison and issue a statement about that, because all of our standards, we have to issue statistics so that the trier of fact has something to gauge how unique that could be. But what is the likelihood that the DNA could be from someone else? We provide that statistics. We don't just say it matches. That requires a calculation, which we use a genotyping software to do. And Taylor says, I apologize. I think I got lost in there. Are you telling me because it was a mix, you could not have done a manual interpretation on 95.9.1? Because it's a mixed profile, and because if it was, you're saying it was Brian's DNA, Brian Kohlberger's DNA present, that would be a comparison in this case, which we have to provide a statistic in order to make the statement. In order to deconvolute a mixture, we're no longer allowed to do those manually. To deconvolute, as in to separate the mixture into its components, we have a software. That software was not designed for doing evidence-to-evidence comparisons. And Taylor says, now you're speaking my language. Validations are important for integrity. Is that right? So this little part this last bit of what this lady Rylene said, she's saying that the software that they utilized is not validated for doing evidence to evidence comparisons, which is what they've been fucking doing all along, right? They built up several fucking profiles, all from random pieces of evidence from the trash full or from the sheath, and you can't compare it to each other. You can't compare all of these profiles to each other. Why? Because the software that is being utilized in this lab was not designed to do that. And this is where a lot of people get lost in the sauce, in the scientific facts, right? It's not like it just spits out random information. It's giving you a number, it's giving you statistics, but at the end of the day, the software is made to be used in a very specific manner, right? You can't just compare evidence to evidence. And here we have Rylene saying that. And that's why Anne is now saying, now you're speaking my language, because that's what she's been trying to get at this whole time, that they fucked up along the way. We know that there's probably been some fuck ups with the IgG. So she says validations are important for integrity. Isn't that right? She's a smart ass. In forensics, our lab uses validations to ensure any new tool is working properly. Now, at some point later, your lab issued a report saying matching the DNA on the sheath with DNA taken from Brian Koberger. Is that right? That's correct, and a statistic was provided. Now, I want to talk about what we're talking about when we say the sheath in quotation marks. You're familiar with what happened with the sheath for swabbing, is that right? I've seen the sheath. I know how our lab performs swabbing of evidence, but I did not swab the item of evidence, nor did I see it being swabbed. As I understand it, though, you've read the lab notes. At one point, I believe I did read the notes. I think I was asked a question, and the analyst was out of town or something. And I think you answered that question to law enforcement after consulting somebody else who was with the swabber when the sheath was swabbed. Is that right? Oh, shit. Who was with the swabber when the sheath was swabbed? It sounds familiar. If I understand the lab reports, it's a single source on the knife sheath. Is that right? Correct. Does that mean it's the only person in that area? Yes, that was detected through our testing. Tell me where you think that sheath was swabbed for purposes of DNA collection. I believe the analyst swabbed there's kind of a snap or a button that was on top of the snap, and there's the area that was swabbed. There was other areas on it sampled as well. For the purposes of unknown male A, that you're telling us later came back to Brian Koberger, that's the only place I want to talk about right now. Are we on the top of the button, the outside, or on the inside, the socket portion of the button? I know on the top. I don't recall if it was swabbed the underside or not. I'd have to look at the notes again. So it's the top. A lot of us have thought that maybe it was inside the button. I showed you guys in a video a long time ago, probably 2 years ago, my K-bar that I had in the military. If you pull that snap button, I always just assumed that that's where they had swabbed, but now they're saying on the top, according to the lab notes. But she says, I don't recall if she swabbed the underside or not. I have to look at her notes again. And Taylor, do you know if that sheath was part of that preserved for fingerprinting? The swabbing was done first. That's our lab standard order of processing. If DNA is needed and fingerprints, they will work together. Essentially, fingerprints will say we can see some possible ridge detail. So if you can avoid this area, after DNA says we want to swab this, and then we decide what would best suit that item of evidence to determine where to swab. So the swabbing takes place first. And Taylor says, I don't think I have any other questions right now. Thank you. That was a very long cross-examination that is not a good one. It's not a good one when we're thinking about the justice system, right? It's not a good one when we are realizing how many laws were potentially broken here by ISP, how maybe things were not being done following SOPs, standard operating procedures that would have taken place in a decent lab. And concerning also all of these profiles that were built. Because now, what did we learn? What did we learn today, guys? We have learned that all of these profiles that were built, basically, they don't know shit. They don't know if they are male, if they are female. They know for a fact now that they found female DNA in all of these mixed samples. And when samples are mixed, according to science, according to this software, you cannot tell, this software cannot tell when there are mixed samples of DNA if it's male or female. So for all we know, all these fucking A through E samples could be Koberger's mom sucking on a water bottle or something. But they're still calling it male DNA. Why are they calling it male DNA versus mixed sample? Why? To reinforce the narrative, right? It's that simple, unfortunately. And when we realized that the testing that they did was actually STR testing, which is a pretty shitty type of testing compared to SNP testing, it's like, oh, we really don't know shit. All these samples sound like it's trash. So it's bad news for it's bad news for our justice system. How these scientific terms of DNA, SNPs, STRs can be utilized against us because they think we're stupid. But it's also a good day for Mr. Koberger, right? It's a good day for us going through this redacted hearing and learning that what we have thought of all along, you know, our doubts of the fuck ups with the IgG, with the swabbing, with the gathering of the DNA, the trash pull that took place in PA, you know, that instinctual feeling that we had that there had been some sort of fuck up, some sort of something wrong. And it's starting to, the puzzle's starting to come together, right? So I'm going to just end it here, guys, because I think I'm running a fever. I have the flu, probably. So we went through page 25 or 35 through 70, and I wanted to go, we have 100 pages left, right? I wanted to go through some other documents today, but I'm too tired, and I have been here 62 fucking minutes. Oh my god. Give it a like. Give it a like if you enjoyed this live. Make sure to hit like, subscribe, and notifications, whatever else I'm supposed to say. Oh, before I leave, I do want to chat with you guys. Who's in the chat? Are y'all in the chat? Is anybody live on Friday night? My mouth is so dry. How many people are in here? 116. Oh my gosh. You guys are up so late. It's almost bedtime for me. I'm just kidding. Hello, Back with Beats is here and Sassy is here. Late again, she says. No worries, as long as you guys are all here. As long as the families gather around on Friday night, it's all that matters. It's all that matters. Hello, Jane. Oh no. Get well, Jane. Hope you feel better. Was this another hearing? This was a redacted hearing, the 175-page document, the redacted hearing for January 23rd, 2025, guys. Big Mike, welcome. Hi, Dan. Hello. Yes, Cammy, because they want it to be Brian. Kelly Ann. Hello here. Small fries. Yes. Well wishes for Jane and her puppy. Do you have a puppy, Jane? I hope you guys are all doing amazing out there. Try to stay healthy. It's tough out here. In this economy, it's tough. Yeah, exactly. D Small says if you have his cigarette, then they didn't need a swab. They had saliva. Interesting, right? How many mixtures on that sheath? WTF, D Smalls. Jane says, I tried eating ginger yesterday and it didn't even last 1 second. Oh my gosh, girl. Was it fresh ginger? No. It's going to burn your mouth. Maybe some tea or something, okay? Feel better. Coconut water is the best. I love it. ALW, my gosh, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm so sorry, honey. Feel better. It's so tough out here, right? We're all struggling. I hope you guys feel better. It's all insane, all of you. This is crazy, right? Is it not crazy? Thank you, Ashley Activism. Thank you. Thank you, MM1 Bella. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. I'm going to go get some sleep. Thank you, Judgmental. Oh, I see what you did there. Judgmental. That's cute. You guys are funny. Dan. Hi, Dan. Nothing can stop beautiful Nika. Why are you so good to me? I love Dan. He's always super positive. Mandy, he's an scapegoat. Hello, Big Mike. Hi, Thomas. Hi, Joe from Australia. Can I come to Australia? It's so cold in Chicago today. It was actually kind of nice, but it's really windy, so. Thank you, guys. Thank you for joining me. I know it was a long, kind of boring, redacted hearing. I know it can get tedious, but we have to go through this because there's so much shit that we are learning. Every time there's a legal document that we go through, we learn of all the screw-ups, all the law breaking, allegedly, of these laboratories, right? ISP. So just wanted to cover all that with you today. Thank you for joining me in the live. Love you guys. Get well soon. Have some soup for me. And I think that's it. All right. Good night, guys. Thank you for joining me. Have a good night. Bye-bye. Take care. Have a good weekend. I almost forgot it was Friday.